Mia Zapata was not just an aim in the music world, she was a voice that carried raw emotion, honesty, and defiance. Born in Louisville, Kentucky, in 1965, Mia grew up with a deep love for music and self-expression. From a young age, she rejected conformity and embraced individuality. Music became her refuge, her rebellion, and ultimately her identity. She wasn't chasing fame, she was chasing truth. By her early 20s, Mia had become the lead singer of the punk rock band The Gits, a group known for its powerful lyrics and unapologetic sound. Her voice was intense and commanding, yet vulnerable. On stage, she radiated confidence. Off stage, she was thoughtful, introspective, and deeply loyal to her friends. Those who knew her described her as fearless in art, but gentle in life. In the late 1980s, Mia moved to Seattle, Washington, a city buzzing with underground music and creative energy. Seattle at that time was becoming a hub for alternative and punk rock scenes. Mia felt alive there. She immersed herself in music, community, and creativity. Her days were filled with rehearsals, performances, and long conversations about art, politics, and life. Despite her bold public persona, Mia lived modestly. She walked most places, trusted the city, and believed in human connection. Seattle felt safe to her place, where artists looked out for one another. She often walked home alone after late-night rehearsals or shows, something that was common and rarely questioned at the time. On the night of July 6, 1993, Mia attended a band rehearsal. It was an ordinary night, nothing that hinted at tragedy. After practice ended in the early hours of July 7th, Mia began walking home alone. It was a short walk, one she had taken many times before. She never arrived. The next morning, Mia Zapata's body was found in a quiet residential area. The news sent shockwaves through Seattle's music community. The details were horrifying. She had been brutally assaulted and murdered. The vibrant voice that had energized stages and inspired listeners was suddenly silenced. For those who loved her, disbelief quickly turned into devastation. How could this happen? To Mia, in a city she trusted, in a community that prided itself on safety and solidarity. Police launched an investigation immediately, but answers were scarce. There were no clear suspects, no witnesses, and no immediate leads. The brutality of the crime contrasted sharply with the lack of evidence. Days turned into weeks, weeks into months, and then years with no arrest. Mia's murder became an open wound for Seattle. Her bandmates were shattered. Fans mourned not only the loss of an artist, but the loss of a woman whose voice had represented honesty and strength. Candlelight vigils were held. Her music took on a new weight. Every lyric felt heavier, every performance in her memory more emotional.
As time passed, frustration grew. Mia Zapata's case began to feel like another unsolved crime, another woman lost without justice. But those who loved her refused to let her be forgotten. Her name continued to be spoken. Her story continued to be told. This was not just the story of a murder, it was the beginning of a long fight for justice. And it would take years before the truth finally surfaced. In the days following Mia Zapata's murder, Seattle felt different. The city that once symbolized freedom, late-night walks, and artistic safety was suddenly gripped by fear. For Mia's friends, bandmates, and the wider music community, grief mixed with anger and disbelief. Everyone asked the same question: who did this, and why was there no answer? The police investigation began quickly, but almost immediately, it ran into problems. There were no witnesses who had seen Mia during her final moments. No clear suspect emerged. The physical evidence collected at the scene offered little direction at the time, especially given the limitations of forensic technology in the early 1990s. Days passed with no breakthroughs, and hope slowly began to fade. For Mia's band, The Gits, life felt frozen. Rehearsal spaces fell silent. Future plans vanished overnight. Her bandmates struggled not only with loss but also with guilt, wondering if something could have been done differently, if Mia should not have walked alone, if the world had failed to protect her. These thoughts haunted them, even though none of it was their fault. As months turned into years, the case grew cold. Police continued to revisit evidence from time to time, but without new leads, Mia Zapata's murder slipped further into the shadows of unsolved crimes. For the public, the story slowly disappeared from headlines. For those who loved her, it never left their hearts. But Mia's memory refused to fade quietly. Her friends and fellow musicians took action. They organized benefit concerts, awareness events, and memorial shows in her name. These were not just tributes, they were acts of resistance against silence. One of the most significant efforts was the formation of a group called Home Alive, created to honor Mia's legacy by empowering women through self-defense education. The message was clear: if the system could not protect women, then women would protect one another. The music community rallied behind this cause. Famous artists joined the effort, raising funds and awareness. Mia's death became a symbol not just of loss, but of the dangers women face simply by existing in public spaces. Her story sparked conversations that many had avoided for too long. Still, justice remained painfully out of reach. For Mia's family, the waiting was unbearable. Every phone call brought a mix of hope and dread. Years passed with no rest, no trial, no closure. Her parents aged with unanswered questions. Birthdays, holidays, and anniversaries became reminders of what had been stolen. Behind the scenes, however, science was slowly catching up. By the late 1990s and early 2000s, advances in DNA technology began transforming criminal investigations. Old evidence could now be tested in ways that were impossible when Mia was killed. Detectives reopened the case with renewed determination. What had once seemed like a dead end suddenly held new possibilities.
In 2001, forensic testing revealed a breakthrough. DNA found on Mia's body matched an unknown male profile already present in a national criminal database. This discovery reignited the investigation after nearly 8 years of silence. For the first time, there was a real chance to identify the person responsible. The suspect was a man named Jesus Mezquia, a Cuban immigrant who had lived in Florida and later moved to Washington state. He had no known connection to Mia. To investigators, this detail was chilling. It suggested that Mia's murder was not the result of a personal dispute, it was a random, violent act against a woman who had trusted her surroundings. Authorities now faced a new challenge: building a case strong enough to stand in court after so many years. Witness memories had faded. Physical evidence was limited. The defense would undoubtedly question the reliability of old DNA samples and delayed prosecution. Yet despite the obstacles, detectives pressed forward. They reconstructed timelines, reviewed past interviews, and examined Mezquia's movements around the time of the murder. Slowly, piece by piece, the story began to form. When Mezquia was arrested in 2002, the news sent shockwaves through Seattle once again. For many, it felt unreal. After nearly a decade, the man accused of killing Mia Zapata was finally in custody. Relief mixed with fear that there was an answer, fear that justice could still slip away. For Mia's loved ones, the arrest reopened old wounds. Grief resurfaced with full force, but this time, it came with something new: cautious hope. They knew the road ahead would be difficult, but for the first time in years, the silence had been broken. The fight for justice was no longer just a dream. It was finally moving forward. The trial began with the weight of nearly a decade of waiting pressing down on everyone involved. For Mia Zapata's family, friends, and supporters, walking into the courtroom felt like reopening a wound that had never fully healed. Yet this time, there was determination in the air. This was no longer just about grief, it was about accountability. Prosecutors built their case carefully, knowing the defense would focus on the years that had passed since the crime. Their strongest evidence was DNA. Scientific experts explained how genetic material collected from Mia's body matched the DNA of Jesus Mezquia with overwhelming certainty. The courtroom listened in silence as statistics represented odds so small that coincidence was impossible. What once seemed like a cold case was now supported by the clarity of modern forensic science. The defense argued back fiercely. They questioned the chain of custody, the reliability of old evidence, and the lack of eyewitnesses. They painted a picture of doubt, hoping that uncertainty would be enough to free the accused. But the prosecution returned again and again to the same point: DNA does not forget, even when time passes. As the days went on, witnesses took the stand. Police officers described the original investigation, its limits, and the frustration of having no answers for years. Friends spoke about Mia, not just how she died, but how she lived. They described her kindness, her passion for music, her courage, and her belief in independence. These testimonies transformed her from a headline into a human being, reminding the jury that this was a real life, not just a case file. One of the most powerful moments came when the impact of Mia's death on the community was discussed. The creation of Home Alive, the self-defense movement born from her loss, showed how deeply her murder had affected countless women. Her story had already changed lives even before the verdict was reached. After weeks of testimony, the case went to the jury. The wait for a decision felt endless. For Mia's parents, every hour was heavy with memories and fear. Would justice finally be served? Or would the system fail her once again? When the jury returned, the courtroom stood still. Jesus Mezquia was found guilty of first-degree murder. The verdict brought an emotional release that many had waited years for. Tears flowed freely, some of relief, some of sorrow, some for the time that could never be given back. In 2004, Mezquia was sentenced to 36 years in prison, a punishment reflecting the severity of the crime, the life that had been stolen. Justice had come, but it came late. For Mia's family, the sentence did not erase the pain, but it offered something they had been denied for years: truth and recognition. The world now officially acknowledged what they had always known, that Mia's life mattered, and her death was not forgotten.
Mia Zapata's legacy did not end in the courtroom. Her story continues to echo through music, activism, and conversations about women's safety. She became a symbol of both vulnerability and strength, of how a single act of violence can expose deep societal failures, but also inspire collective action. Today, Mia is remembered not only as a victim, but as a catalyst for change. Her name lives on in songs, organizations, and the determination of people who refuse to accept silence. Her story reminds us that justice, even when delayed, is worth fighting for, and that remembering is a powerful form of resistance. Mia Zapata's voice was taken from the world, but her story still speaks. And it always will.